I'm gonna blow your mind with something terrifying. The average American now consumes 126 grams of sugar daily in 2025, which adds up to nearly 100 pounds per year. Here's the kicker. Your brain's reward system responds to sugar much like addiction pathways, making it incredibly hard to resist. The food industry has spent decades optimizing the perfect combination of sugar, fat, and salt to maximize pleasure and consumption. And they're making billions while you're stuck in a glucose roller coaster that's slowly destroying your health. What I'm about to show you will make you question every single thing in your pantry right now, starting with something that might make you angry about your own childhood. The sugar conspiracy that started in your childhood. That bowl of Frosted Flakes you ate as a kid contains 12 grams of sugar per serving. That's a serious sugar hit disguised as breakfast. But here's what's really messed up about this whole situation. Cereal companies knew exactly what they were doing when they put that sugar bomb in a colorful box and aimed it directly at your developing brain. Back in the 1970s, companies like Kellogg's and General Mills started using sophisticated marketing research to test exactly what would make kids obsessed with their products. These weren't marketing people making random guesses about what kids might like. These were systematic studies testing how color combinations on cereal boxes would catch a child's attention from across the grocery store aisle. They figured out that placing cereals at eye level for kids would increase sales by 23%. They learned that cartoon mascots needed to make direct eye contact with children on the box to create what they called an emotional connection. Take Tony the Tiger. He wasn't just a random cartoon character. He was specifically designed to represent strength and energy that kids wanted to associate with themselves. Every single detail was tested and refined based on how it affected children's desire to consume the product. Tony the Tiger is basically a drug dealer with better marketing and a catchphrase. Think about it, he shows up everywhere, he's got that memorable slogan, and he's always promising you're gonna feel great if you just try his product. The only difference is that Tony's got Saturday morning commercials and colorful packaging instead of hanging out on street corners. The toy prizes inside cereal boxes represented the next level of psychological manipulation. Marketing studies showed that the anticipation of finding a prize increased brand loyalty and repeat purchases among children. Kids would get excited about the possibility of finding a toy, and their brains would associate that positive feeling with the cereal itself. This created what researchers called anticipatory addiction. Children would crave the cereal not just for the taste, but for the emotional experience of the potential reward. These companies understood something that most parents didn't. They were programming children's brains during the most critical period of development. Research shows that early eating patterns established in childhood set lifelong food preferences and consumption habits. Between ages 2 and 7, children's brains are forming the neural pathways that will determine their relationship with food for life. Every time a kid ate sugary cereal and experienced that rush of sweetness, their brain was literally being wired to crave sugar. The bright colors, the cartoon characters, the toys, and the sugar hit were all working together to create what neuroscientists now call food imprinting. This childhood programming didn't just disappear when you became an adult. It became the foundation for lifelong sugar craving patterns. Your brain learned to associate sugar with comfort, reward, and happiness during those critical early years. When you feel stressed as an adult and reach for something sweet, you're not making a conscious choice, you're following neural pathways that were carved into your brain when you were 5 years old eating Lucky Charms while watching cartoons. The thing you need to understand is that your current sugar cravings aren't personal failures or lack of willpower. They're engineered responses that were programmed into your brain before you were old enough to understand what was happening. Food companies spent millions of dollars and decades of research to figure out exactly how to make you crave their products for life. And they started working on you when your brain was most vulnerable to this kind of programming. Food scientists working for these companies use a term called the Bliss point to describe the perfect combination of sugar, fat, and salt that triggers maximum consumption. This isn't some accidental discovery. It's the result of thousands of hours of laboratory testing using focus groups, brain imaging, and behavioral analysis. They know exactly how much sugar to add to make you want more without making you feel sick. They know how to balance the fat content to make the product dissolve perfectly in your mouth. They understand how salt enhances the perception of sweetness and makes you crave more. The Bliss Point research extends far beyond just cereal. It's now applied to everything from crackers to yogurt to bread. Food manufacturers have detailed maps of human taste preferences and exactly how to trigger the brain's reward system for maximum effect. They know that combining sugar with certain textures will make people eat 40% more than they intended. They understand that specific flavor profiles will override the brain's natural satiety signals. This level of scientific manipulation has created a generation of adults who struggle with food cravings that feel completely out of their control. When you can't stop eating certain foods, when you find yourself thinking about snacks throughout the day, when you feel like you're addicted to sugar, you're experiencing the exact responses these companies designed and tested to achieve. The implications for adult eating behaviors and health outcomes are staggering. Adults who were exposed to this childhood programming show measurably different brain responses to sugar compared to people who grew up eating traditional diets. Their reward systems require higher levels of stimulation to achieve satisfaction, which means they need more sugar to feel the same pleasure response. Their stress responses are tied to sugar consumption in ways that make emotional eating almost inevitable. The food industry created what researchers now call hyper-palatable food environments, where every processed product is designed to trigger overconsumption. Your local grocery store contains thousands of products that have been scientifically engineered to hijack your brain's reward system, and most people have no idea this manipulation is even happening. Here's the number that's gonna make you sick. The average American child now consumes their body weight in sugar every single year. A 50-pound 7-year-old is eating 50 pounds of sugar annually, which breaks down to more than 2 ounces of pure sugar every single day. This isn't happening because kids have poor self-control or because parents don't care. It's happening because the food industry has spent 50 years perfecting the science of making sugar irresistible to developing brains. But what's really going to shock you is what sugar is actually doing to your brain on a neurochemical level. Your brain on sugar is literally like your brain on cocaine. When you eat sugar, your brain activates the same dopamine reward circuits that respond to addictive substances. Sugar triggers similar reward pathways as some addictive drugs, leading to powerful cravings that feel completely beyond your control. Neuroimaging studies show that sugar consumption lights up your brain's reward center in ways that create genuine neurochemical dependency. Both sugar and addictive substances target what scientists call the brain's reward center, which is this ancient system that evolved to help humans survive. When our ancestors found ripe fruit or honey, their brains would flood with dopamine to make sure they remembered where to find these rare, high-energy foods again. This reward system was designed to activate maybe once or twice a month when you stumbled across something naturally sweet in the wild. It was never meant to handle the constant bombardment of refined sugar that modern humans consume every single day. The dopamine release you get from sugar follows a familiar pattern. There's an immediate spike that makes you feel amazing, followed by a drop that leaves you wanting more. Your brain's reward pathways don't distinguish between different sources of dopamine stimulation, they just know they want that feeling again. This is why you can finish an entire sleeve of cookies and still want more, even when you're physically full and mentally disgusted with yourself for eating them. Here's what's really messed up about this whole situation. At least drug dealers don't put their product in baby food and market it as essential nutrition for growing children. Sugar pushers have somehow convinced parents that feeding kids sugar-laden cereals, juices, and snacks is normal child care. The research on sugar's addictive potential gets even more disturbing when you look at animal studies. Scientists at Princeton University ran studies where they gave rats access to both sugar water and cocaine. The rats chose sugar over cocaine consistently. When researchers tried to get the sugar-addicted rats to switch to cocaine, most of them refused. The sugar had created stronger addiction patterns than an actual controlled substance. These results have been replicated in multiple laboratories using different methodologies. Rats with intermittent access to sugar showed all the classic signs of addiction. They binged when sugar was available, they showed withdrawal symptoms when it was removed, and they would work harder to get sugar than rats would work to get cocaine. Research by Rada and colleagues found that sugar consumption triggered dopamine release in the rat's nucleus accumbens shell, the same brain region involved in drug addiction. What's happening in your brain when you eat sugar is that you're hijacking a survival system that took millions of years to develop. Your reward pathways evolved to activate when you found foods that would keep you alive during famines and harsh seasons. The dopamine release was meant to be rare and special, creating powerful memories that would help you survive. But now you're triggering this ancient survival system multiple times per day with processed foods that contain concentrated amounts of sugar your ancestors never encountered. Every time you eat sugar, you're essentially telling your brain that you found a life-saving energy source that needs to be remembered and sought out again. Your neural pathways start to prioritize sugar-seeking behavior over other activities because your brain thinks this is critical for your survival. This is why you can be completely focused on work or a conversation, but the moment someone mentions ice cream or cookies, your attention immediately shifts to thoughts about sweet food. The more sugar you consume, the more your brain adapts to expect these dopamine hits. Your neurons literally restructure themselves to accommodate the constant flood of sugar-induced dopamine. The receptors that respond to dopamine become less sensitive, which means you need more sugar to get the same pleasurable feeling you used to get from smaller amounts. This is called tolerance, and it's the same process that happens with addictive substances. What food companies figured out decades ago is that they could exploit this biological vulnerability for massive profits. They discovered that by adding sugar to foods that never contained it naturally, bread, pasta sauce, salad dressing, crackers, they could make people crave these products in ways that had nothing to do with actual hunger or nutritional needs. They weren't just selling food anymore, they were selling neurochemical experiences designed to create repeat customers. The food industry now employs teams of neuroscientists and food chemists whose entire job is to understand how different combinations of sugar, salt, and fat affect brain chemistry. They use brain imaging technology to see exactly which formulations create the strongest dopamine responses. They test thousands of variations of their products to find the precise combination that will make people eat the most while feeling the least satisfied. Brain imaging studies are showing sugar addiction patterns in children as young as 5 years old. When researchers put kids in MRI machines and show them pictures of sugary foods, their brains light up in the same areas that activate in adult drug addicts when they see images of their preferred substance. These children haven't even developed full impulse control yet, and their reward systems are already being rewired by sugar consumption. When adults try to quit sugar, they experience withdrawal symptoms that mirror drug withdrawal. People report headaches, mood swings, irritability, anxiety, and intense cravings that can last for days or weeks. Their sleep patterns get disrupted, they have trouble concentrating, and they often experience what researchers call anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure from activities they normally enjoy. This is why quitting sugar feels impossible for most people. It's not a matter of willpower or self-control. Your brain is literally experiencing neurochemical withdrawal. The difference is that sugar withdrawal doesn't get any medical recognition or support, so people think they're just weak or lacking discipline when they can't stick to a sugar-free diet. Your brain adapted to expect regular hits of sugar-induced dopamine, and when you remove that source, it takes time for your neural pathways to readjust to normal levels of stimulation. The withdrawal symptoms you experience are your brain's way of demanding that you restore the artificial dopamine levels it became accustomed to receiving from sugar consumption. But sugar addiction is just the beginning of how the food industry has weaponized your biology against you. The real manipulation happens when they combine sugar with other ingredients in ways that make resistance practically impossible. The food industry's secret weapon, ultra-processed addiction engineering. Food manufacturers research flavor and texture combinations to create what researchers call hyper-palatable products, foods engineered to hit the bliss point that triggers maximum consumption. Ever wonder why you literally cannot eat just one potato chip? That slogan wasn't just clever marketing. It was a scientific admission that these foods are designed to override your body's natural satiety signals. The reason you can't stop eating certain processed foods has nothing to do with your willpower, and everything to do with systematic research into ingredient combinations that make you lose control. These companies operate specialized research facilities where food scientists use advanced equipment to engineer products that trigger overconsumption. Think about how absurd this is. We've got brilliant minds with advanced degrees whose entire career is dedicated to figuring out how to make you eat more than your body needs. They're using serious scientific methods to create foods that you physically cannot stop eating. The process involves testing thousands of different combinations of sugar, salt, fat, and various additives. Food scientists create hundreds of versions of the same product, each with slightly different ingredient ratios, then test them on focus groups while monitoring eating behavior. They measure how fast people eat each version, how much they consume before feeling satisfied, and most importantly, how quickly they want more. Companies have dedicated teams whose job is to eat products all day while researchers record every detail of the consumption experience. They track which combinations make people eat faster, which ones make them reach for more immediately, and which formulations override the brain's natural satiety signals. This isn't guesswork, it's precision engineering designed to exploit specific biological vulnerabilities in human appetite regulation. One key discovery involves foods that dissolve quickly in your mouth, bypassing normal satiety signals. Your brain tracks food intake partly through mechanical feedback from chewing and swallowing. When food dissolves almost instantly on your tongue, your brain gets confused about how much you've actually eaten and fails to activate normal fullness responses. Popular snack foods demonstrate this principle perfectly. The texture and flavor are formulated to dissolve immediately when they hit your saliva, creating what researchers describe as incomplete satiety signaling. Your mouth experiences intense flavor, but your brain receives minimal signals that you've consumed substantial calories. This is why you can eat an entire bag of certain snacks and still feel hungry. Your brain doesn't register that you've eaten anything because the food disappeared too quickly. The engineering extends beyond taste and texture. Food scientists manipulate temperature, sound, and visual properties to enhance consumption patterns. They discovered that certain types of crunch activate pleasure centers in the brain through audio feedback. The sound of biting into a perfectly crispy snack triggers dopamine release before the food even reaches your taste buds. Companies spend significant resources testing different preparation methods to achieve the exact crunch that maximizes brain reward responses. Temperature manipulation represents another sophisticated approach. Ice cream manufacturers engineer their products to hit your tongue at precisely the right temperature to maximize taste bud activation while minimizing the brain's natural response to cold, which normally signals satiety. They add specific ingredients that create textures that melt at exactly body temperature for maximum flavor release and minimum satiety signaling. Branding and product placement influence impulse purchases according to marketing studies. Food companies understand optimal shelf positioning and package designs that trigger immediate desire responses. The colors, fonts, and imagery are carefully selected to maximize appeal and create urgency around purchase decisions. The profits from engineering highly palatable foods are staggering. Companies that successfully create frequent consumers of their products see profit margins that rival other major industries. Internal food industry research shows that the top consumers account for the majority of total consumption for most processed food categories. These heavy users aren't just loyal customers, they're people whose eating patterns have been influenced by engineered food products. Food company executives track metrics related to consumption frequency and product appeal to measure how successfully their formulations create repeat purchase behavior. They monitor when focus group participants report thinking about their products throughout the day or feeling strong preferences for specific items. The language used in internal communications focuses on creating emotional connections and brand loyalty. The scope of this engineering has reached massive proportions in 2025. Ultra-processed foods now make up the majority of the American food supply, which means most of what's available in grocery stores has been optimized for palatability and consumption. Walk through any supermarket and you're surrounded by thousands of products designed to maximize appeal and override natural appetite regulation. The center aisles of grocery stores have become environments where making moderate choices requires constantly resisting products designed to promote overconsumption. Every package, every flavor combination, every texture has been optimized through testing to encourage purchasing and eating more than your body needs. The food industry has created conditions where healthy eating requires fighting against products engineered to undermine self-control. Food companies now invest heavily in palatability research, employing specialists in taste science, behavioral psychology, and consumer preferences. Their focus is understanding how to make food as appealing and irresistible as possible. This represents a significant shift in how food products are developed and marketed. This level of systematic optimization explains why so many people struggle with food cravings that feel completely beyond their control. When you can't stop eating certain foods, when you find yourself thinking about snacks constantly, when you feel drawn to specific products, you're not experiencing personal weakness. You're experiencing biological responses that have been carefully studied and optimized by teams of researchers. But the real damage from these engineered foods isn't just that they make you eat more. It's what happens inside your body when you consume them. The glucose spike roller coaster that's destroying your life. Here's something that's gonna mess with your head. You eat a bagel for breakfast expecting energy, and 30 minutes later you feel like you got hit by a truck. You drink orange juice thinking you're getting vitamins and natural energy, then spend the next 2 hours feeling exhausted and craving more food. This happens because what you think is giving you energy is actually putting your body through a biological nightmare that leaves you more drained than when you started. When you eat sugar or refined carbs, your blood glucose shoots up like a rocket, then crashes down like a lead balloon. This isn't a gentle rise and fall, it's a violent spike that can take your blood sugar from normal levels to diabetic levels within minutes, even if you don't have diabetes. Your body experiences this as a biological emergency and responds with a cascade of stress hormones and inflammatory reactions that affect every single cell in your body. Glucose spikes are like that friend who shows up to the party super excited and energetic, gets everyone amped up, then suddenly crashes hard and brings down the entire mood of the room. Except instead of ruining one party, glucose spikes are ruining your cellular party multiple times every single day. Continuous glucose monitor studies show multiple spikes per day in many people, and most have absolutely no idea this is happening to them. Every time your blood sugar spikes, you're stressing the mitochondria inside your cells. Mitochondria are these tiny powerhouses that create actual energy for your body. They're what make you feel alive and vibrant. When glucose floods your system too quickly, these mitochondria get overwhelmed and can contribute to the fatigue you experience. It's like forcing a car engine to redline constantly. Eventually, the engine struggles to perform properly. The mitochondrial stress from glucose spikes creates a sick irony where the foods you eat for energy actually interfere with your body's ability to create energy efficiently. Each spike makes your mitochondria work harder while you feel more tired. This is why people who eat high-sugar diets often feel exhausted all the time despite consuming thousands of calories. Their cellular energy production is compromised and can't convert food into usable energy effectively. The crash that follows every glucose spike is where things get really sinister. When your blood sugar plummets after spiking, your brain interprets this as a life-threatening emergency. It floods your system with stress hormones and triggers intense cravings for quick energy, meaning more sugar. This crash doesn't just make you hungry, it makes you specifically crave the exact foods that caused the spike in the first place. Your brain releases dopamine when you eat sugar, the same neurotransmitter involved in drug addiction. The spike and crash cycle creates what researchers call a sugar addiction cycle, where the crash from one sugar hit triggers cravings for the next sugar hit. You're not weak for craving sugar after eating sugar, you're experiencing a designed biological response that keeps you consuming more of the substance that's damaging your body. This cycle affects every system in your body because glucose spikes trigger systemic inflammation that reaches your brain, your joints, your skin, your digestive system, and your hormonal system. The inflammation from glucose spikes shows up as acne, eczema, and psoriasis on your skin. It creates brain fog and mood swings in your nervous system. It disrupts sleep patterns and creates hormonal imbalances that affect everything from your energy levels to your reproductive health. The constant biological stress from frequent glucose spikes puts your body in a perpetual state of emergency response. Your adrenal glands are constantly pumping out stress hormones. Your immune system is constantly fighting inflammation. Your pancreas is constantly overproducing insulin. This chronic stress accelerates aging and creates the perfect conditions for chronic diseases to develop. These aren't just people eating obvious junk food, these are people consuming what they think are normal, healthy meals. A bowl of oatmeal with fruit spikes glucose. Whole wheat toast spikes glucose. A supposedly healthy smoothie with fruit and yogurt creates massive glucose spikes that last for hours. The long-term consequences of this constant glucose roller coaster are showing up in ways that researchers are just beginning to understand. People who experience frequent glucose spikes have higher rates of cardiovascular disease, autoimmune conditions, and accelerated cognitive decline. The World Health Organization recommends a maximum of 25 grams of sugar per day, but most people consume 3 to 4 times that amount without realizing it. Here's what's really gonna blow your mind. Research connects chronic glucose dysregulation to cognitive decline and brain health issues. When your blood sugar crashes after a spike, it doesn't just affect your energy, it affects your neurotransmitter production and brain function. The inflammation from glucose spikes can damage brain tissue and disrupt the neural pathways involved in mood regulation and cognitive function. Studies show connections between blood sugar dysregulation and brain health that are so strong that people with diabetes have significantly higher risks of developing cognitive problems compared to people with stable blood sugar. The connection between glucose regulation and brain function is becoming impossible to ignore. The reason you feel terrible despite eating what seems like normal food is that normal food in 2025 isn't actually normal by historical standards. The processed foods that make up most people's diets are specifically designed to create glucose spikes that trigger overconsumption. Your fatigue, brain fog, mood swings, and constant hunger aren't personality flaws or signs of aging. They're symptoms of glucose dysregulation caused by eating foods that spike your blood sugar multiple times every day. When you understand that glucose spikes are creating inflammation, stressing your cellular energy production, and triggering addictive craving cycles, suddenly all those mysterious health problems start making perfect sense. But here's where things get really weird. Despite all this excess sugar and all these calories, your body is somehow convinced that it's starving. Why your body thinks it's starving in the land of plenty? This metabolic chaos creates the most insane contradiction in modern health. We live in a country where 73% of adults are overweight or obese, but simultaneously 88% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy and suffering from nutrient deficiencies. People are consuming more calories than ever before in human history, while their bodies are literally starving at the cellular level. Your body can be drowning in excess calories, while your cells are screaming for actual nutrition. The reason this biological nightmare is happening comes down to the difference between calories and nutrients. Processed foods provide massive amounts of calories from sugar, refined flour, and industrial oils, but they contain almost no vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, or other compounds that your cells actually need to function. When you eat a 600-calorie fast food meal, you're flooding your system with energy your body can't properly use while providing almost none of the micronutrients your cellular machinery requires to convert that energy into usable fuel. Your body is like a confused tourist trying to navigate a foreign city with a completely broken GPS system. It knows it needs to get somewhere important, but every signal it's receiving is contradictory and misleading. Your hunger signals are firing constantly because your cells aren't getting what they need, but the foods available in the modern environment provide calories without the nutrients required to satisfy cellular hunger. This creates what researchers call cellular hunger, a state where your individual cells are literally starving for nutrients even when your stomach is full and your fat stores are overflowing. Your mitochondria need specific vitamins and minerals to produce energy. Your neurotransmitter production requires particular amino acids and cofactors. Your immune system depends on antioxidants and trace elements to function properly. When you eat processed foods that lack these essential nutrients, your cells send out distress signals that your brain interprets as hunger. The cellular starvation signals don't just make you hungry, they make you specifically crave more processed foods because your brain associates the temporary energy hit from sugar and refined carbs with relief from the starvation signals. This creates a vicious cycle where eating nutrient-poor foods makes you hungrier for more nutrient-poor foods. Your body keeps demanding more calories because it's desperately searching for the nutrients it needs to function, but the foods you're eating provide more empty calories instead of actual nutrition. Think about how backwards this situation really is. You eat a giant meal that contains 1,200 calories, but 2 hours later you're ravenously hungry again. This isn't happening because you didn't eat enough food. It's happening because your cells still haven't received the nutrients they need to produce energy, synthesize hormones, or repair cellular damage. Your brain interprets this nutrient deficiency as starvation and triggers intense hunger signals to try to get you to find actual nutrition. The problem gets exponentially worse when insulin resistance enters the picture. Even when your blood contains plenty of glucose from all the processed foods you've eaten, insulin resistance makes it impossible for your cells to actually access that energy. It's like having a full gas tank in your car but a broken fuel pump. The energy is there, but your cellular machinery can't use it effectively. Insulin resistance turns your body into a metabolic prison where energy gets trapped in your bloodstream and fat cells while your muscles, brain, and organs remain starved for fuel. Your pancreas keeps pumping out more insulin trying to force glucose into resistant cells, but this just makes the resistance worse and creates more inflammation throughout your body. Meanwhile, your brain receives constant signals that energy isn't available at the cellular level, so it triggers more hunger and more cravings for quick energy sources. This metabolic dysfunction explains why people can eat enormous amounts of food and still feel unsatisfied and constantly hungry. Their cells are genuinely starving despite being surrounded by excess calories that can't be properly utilized. The hunger they feel isn't psychological or emotional. It's a legitimate biological response to cellular energy deprivation caused by insulin resistance and nutrient deficiencies. The connection between this cellular communication breakdown and the obesity and diabetes epidemics becomes crystal clear when you understand that both conditions are fundamentally about energy regulation problems. Obesity isn't caused by eating too many calories. It's caused by eating calories that can't be properly utilized by cells, leading to energy storage in fat tissue while organs remain undernourished. Type 2 diabetes isn't caused by eating too much sugar. It's caused by eating processed foods that create insulin resistance and cellular starvation. Studies from 2025 show that 88% of American adults now have at least one marker of metabolic dysfunction, including elevated blood sugar, insulin resistance, high blood pressure, or dyslipidemia. This is happening in the wealthiest country in human history with unprecedented access to food. The problem isn't food scarcity, it's food quality and the complete disconnection between what's available to eat and what human cells actually need to function. This biological confusion doesn't just affect your physical health, it completely disrupts your mood, energy levels, and decision-making capabilities. When your brain isn't getting steady fuel from properly functioning cellular energy production, you experience brain fog, mood swings, anxiety, and depression. Your cognitive function depends on stable energy delivery to neurons, and when that energy delivery is disrupted by glucose spikes, insulin resistance, and nutrient deficiencies, your mental performance suffers dramatically. The constant stress of cellular starvation also affects your decision-making around food. When your brain is desperately searching for nutrients and energy, it prioritizes short-term survival over long-term health. This is why people make food choices they know are bad for them. Their brains are in survival mode, frantically seeking immediate energy sources to satisfy cellular hunger signals. Willpower becomes irrelevant when your biology is screaming for nutrients, and the only foods readily available provide empty calories instead of nutrition. People spend decades fighting food cravings and struggling with their weight, while completely missing the underlying cause of their problems. They blame themselves for lacking self-control or discipline when the real issue is that their cellular communication systems have been hijacked by processed foods that provide calories without nutrients. Their hunger signals aren't working properly because their cells are genuinely starved for the nutrients required for normal metabolic function. The breakthrough insight that changes everything is understanding that fixing this cellular communication breakdown is the actual key to ending food cravings and achieving natural weight regulation. When your cells finally receive the nutrients they need and your insulin sensitivity improves, the constant hunger signals stop firing. Your brain stops frantically searching for energy because your cells can finally access and utilize the energy that's available. This isn't about restriction or willpower. It's about giving your body what it actually needs so that your natural appetite regulation systems can function the way they evolved to work. But here's what's really going to make you angry. The very first meal that sets up this entire metabolic disaster every single day was programmed into your brain as essential for your health. The breakfast lie that's been sabotaging you since childhood. That phrase, breakfast is the most important meal of the day, that your parents drilled into your head, wasn't based on nutrition science or health research. It was literally a marketing slogan created by cereal companies in the early 1900s to sell more boxes of sugar-loaded breakfast products. The Kellogg Company and other breakfast manufacturers spent millions of dollars convincing entire generations that eating sugar first thing in the morning was somehow essential for health and energy. The cereal industry didn't just accidentally stumble into this messaging either. They hired marketing firms and paid for studies that would support their claims about breakfast being crucial for health. They created advertising campaigns that portrayed breakfast cereal as the foundation of a nutritious diet, despite the fact that most breakfast cereals contain more sugar per serving than candy bars. These companies understood that if they could establish breakfast as a non-negotiable meal and position their products as the ideal breakfast choice, they would have customers for life. Think about how brilliant this marketing strategy really was. They convinced parents that feeding their children sugar-laden cereals, pastries, and juice was responsible parenting. They made skipping breakfast seem like neglecting your health or your children's development. They created guilt around not eating breakfast and positioned their processed products as the solution to that guilt. Generations of mothers genuinely believed they were providing optimal nutrition by serving frosted flakes and orange juice every morning. Starting your day with typical breakfast foods is like beginning a marathon by shooting yourself in the foot, then wondering why you feel terrible and can't perform well for the rest of the race. When you eat sugar and refined carbs first thing in the morning, you're guaranteeing that your blood glucose will spike higher and crash harder than at any other time of day. Your body wakes up with cortisol levels naturally elevated to help you transition from sleep to wakefulness, and adding sugar to this hormonal state creates the perfect storm for metabolic chaos. Morning cortisol serves important biological functions. It helps mobilize energy stores, increases alertness, and prepares your body for the day's activities. But when you combine elevated cortisol with a massive influx of sugar from breakfast foods, you amplify every negative effect of glucose spikes. The cortisol makes your cells more resistant to insulin, which means the sugar stays in your bloodstream longer and causes more damage. The combination creates inflammation levels that persist throughout the entire day. Your morning cortisol levels literally amplify the damage from breakfast sugar, creating maximum metabolic chaos that affects every system in your body. The elevated cortisol makes your blood sugar spike higher and stay elevated longer than it would at other times of day. This creates more oxidative stress, more inflammation, and more damage to your cellular energy production systems. The morning glucose spike sets off a cascade of hormonal disruptions that affect your energy, mood, and appetite regulation for the next 12 to 16 hours. The cascade effect from a sugary breakfast is absolutely brutal on your metabolism and energy levels. You eat cereal and orange juice at 7 a.m., your blood sugar rockets up to dangerous levels, then crashes around 10 a.m., leaving you exhausted and craving more sugar. Most people respond to this mid-morning crash by eating more refined carbs, a muffin, a granola bar, or more juice, which creates another spike and crash cycle around noon. This pattern continues throughout the day, creating an endless roller coaster of energy highs and lows that leaves people feeling exhausted despite consuming thousands of calories. Each spike in this daily roller coaster makes the next crash worse because your insulin sensitivity decreases with each glucose spike. Your cells become more resistant to insulin's signal to absorb glucose, so your pancreas has to produce more insulin to achieve the same effect. This creates higher insulin levels, more inflammation, and more severe energy crashes. By the afternoon, most people who started their day with a sugary breakfast are experiencing brain fog, irritability, and intense cravings for more processed foods. The impact on children's ability to focus and learn in school is particularly devastating. Kids who eat sugary breakfasts experience massive glucose spikes right before they need to sit still and concentrate for hours. The initial sugar high might make them feel energetic, but the inevitable crash occurs right around the time they need maximum cognitive function. Teachers report that students who eat typical breakfast foods struggle with attention, mood regulation, and behavioral control throughout the morning. Research shows that children's developing brains are even more sensitive to glucose fluctuations than adult brains. The combination of high cortisol and sugar creates neuroinflammation that directly impairs memory formation, attention span, and emotional regulation. Kids experience this as difficulty concentrating, mood swings, and hyperactivity followed by fatigue. Parents and teachers often attribute these symptoms to behavioral problems or learning disabilities, when they're actually metabolic symptoms caused by breakfast food choices. Studies from 2025 are showing something that completely contradicts decades of breakfast marketing. People who skip breakfast entirely have better metabolic markers than those eating typical breakfast foods. Researchers measured insulin sensitivity, inflammation levels, and glucose control in people who ate standard breakfast foods versus people who practiced intermittent fasting and delayed their first meal until later in the day. The breakfast skippers showed significantly better blood sugar control, lower inflammation, and improved insulin sensitivity. Here's what's going to blow your mind about how quickly your body can reset when you change your breakfast approach. Switching to a protein-rich breakfast can eliminate afternoon sugar cravings within just 3 days. When you eat protein and healthy fats instead of sugar and refined carbs in the morning, you create stable blood sugar that lasts for hours instead of minutes. Your energy remains steady, your mood stays balanced, and your brain doesn't send out desperate hunger signals for quick sugar fixes. The speed of this transformation shows how much your daily energy patterns depend on that first meal. Protein and fat provide sustained fuel that doesn't trigger the insulin response and inflammatory cascade caused by sugar. Your cells receive steady energy delivery throughout the morning, your cortisol levels normalize more quickly, and your appetite regulation systems can function the way they evolved to work. Within 72 hours, most people report feeling more energetic and experiencing fewer cravings than they've felt in years. But here's where things get really twisted. Even people who think they've escaped this breakfast trap by switching to supposedly healthy alternatives are still getting manipulated in ways they never see coming. The hidden sugar epidemic in healthy foods. Many foods marketed as healthy contain hidden added sugars that create the same metabolic chaos as obvious junk food. People who eat clean diets and shop exclusively in the health food sections of grocery stores are still struggling with constant sugar cravings, weight gain, and energy crashes. They're buying organic everything, reading ingredient lists religiously, and avoiding obvious junk food, but they still can't shake the feeling that something is sabotaging their health goals. The foods that wear the biggest health halos often contain more sugar than products that don't even pretend to be healthy. A single serving of flavored Greek yogurt contains 20 grams of sugar, which is more than a serving of vanilla ice cream. Those granola bars that promise to fuel your active lifestyle pack 12 grams of sugar per bar, which exceeds the sugar content of a Snickers bar. The acai bowl that costs $15 at your trendy health cafe contains 35 grams of sugar, which is equivalent to drinking a can of Coke with your breakfast. Reading food labels has become like trying to decode secret government documents where sugar is disguised under dozens of different names. The WHO defines free sugars as all added sugars plus sugars naturally present in honey, syrups, and fruit juices. Food manufacturers use terms like evaporated cane juice, brown rice syrup, coconut nectar, agave syrup, fruit juice concentrate, and dextrose to hide the fact that they're adding sugar to products. They know that consumers are looking for the word sugar on ingredient lists, so they split the sugar content across multiple ingredients with scientific-sounding names that most people don't recognize as sugar. The ingredient list on a typical healthy protein bar reads like a chemistry experiment designed to confuse consumers. You'll see brown rice syrup listed as the second ingredient, followed by organic agave nectar, coconut sugar, and natural flavors that often contain additional sweeteners. Each of these ingredients is sugar, but because they're listed separately, the total sugar content is disguised across multiple line items. The protein bar that promises to support your fitness goals ends up containing more sugar than the candy bars displayed at the checkout counter. Food companies have mastered the art of exploiting health halos to hide sugar content that would shock consumers if they understood what they were actually consuming. They plaster words like organic, natural, superfood, and ancient grains across packaging to create the impression that their products are nutritionally superior, while loading them with sugar that creates the same glucose spikes and metabolic damage as conventional junk food. The organic cane sugar in your health food store granola affects your blood sugar exactly the same way as the high fructose corn syrup in conventional cereals. The psychological manipulation behind health food marketing goes far beyond just hiding sugar content. Companies use terms like clean energy, sustained nutrition, and wholesome ingredients to make consumers feel virtuous about purchasing products that are fundamentally designed to trigger overconsumption. They understand that health-conscious consumers want to believe they're making responsible choices, so they create elaborate stories about superfoods, ancient wisdom, and natural energy sources that distract from the fact that their products are sugar delivery systems with better marketing. Kombucha represents the perfect example of health halo marketing disguising sugar content. This fermented drink is positioned as a probiotic superfood that supports digestive health and provides natural energy. Health influencers promote it as a healthy alternative to soda, and wellness enthusiasts pay premium prices for bottles that promise gut health benefits. But most commercial kombucha contains 8 to 12 grams of sugar per serving, and many people drink multiple bottles per day thinking they're supporting their health, while actually consuming sugar levels that rival soft drinks. The superfood smoothie industry has created an entire category of products that contain catastrophic amounts of sugar while positioning themselves as the pinnacle of healthy nutrition. These smoothies combine fruit juices, fruit purees, agave nectar, and dates to create beverages that can contain 40 to 60 grams of sugar in a single serving. The sugar content exceeds that of milkshakes, but consumers pay premium prices because the smoothies are marketed with images of fresh fruits and promises of vitamins and antioxidants. Energy bars marketed to athletes and fitness enthusiasts often contain more sugar than candy bars specifically, because manufacturers know that active people burn more calories and feel justified consuming higher-calorie products. They use dates, honey, brown rice syrup, and fruit concentrates to create bars that taste like desserts while claiming to provide sustained energy for workouts. Athletes consume these products believing they're fueling their performance, not realizing they're creating glucose spikes that actually impair athletic performance and recovery. The Bread Island health food stores showcases another level of sugar deception, where products marketed as artisanal, sprouted, or ancient grain breads contain added sugars that wouldn't be found in traditional bread recipes. These breads cost 3 times as much as conventional bread and feature packaging that emphasizes their wholesome, traditional preparation methods. Consumers pay premium prices thinking they're avoiding processed foods, while actually purchasing products that contain multiple forms of added sugar designed to enhance flavor and create repeat purchases. WHO studies show that 75% of packaged foods now contain added sugars, with significant concentrations found in products marketed with health claims. The foods that promise the most health benefits often contain substantial sugar because manufacturers know that health-conscious consumers are willing to pay premium prices and are less likely to suspect that healthy products could be sabotaging their goals. The organic juice industry generates billions in revenue by selling fruit juices that contain more sugar per ounce than soft drinks, but consumers purchase them believing they're getting vitamins and natural nutrition. This systematic deception makes it nearly impossible to avoid sugar even when people are actively trying to eliminate it from their diets. Health-conscious consumers spend significantly more money on groceries, invest time in reading labels and researching products, and make genuine efforts to improve their nutrition, but they're still consuming sugar levels that create glucose spikes and metabolic dysfunction. The hidden sugars in healthy foods explain why people can feel like they're doing everything right while still experiencing cravings, energy crashes, and weight gain. The simple rule that cuts through all this marketing deception is this: if a food product needs to advertise how healthy it is, it probably isn't actually healthy. Real whole foods don't need health claims on their packaging because their nutritional value is obvious. An apple doesn't need to advertise that it contains fiber and vitamins. Spinach doesn't need to claim it's a superfood. When companies spend money on marketing messages about health benefits, they're usually trying to distract you from ingredients that would concern you if you understood what they actually were. But here's what's going to blow your mind. There are actually simple techniques that can dramatically reduce the damage from these hidden sugars without requiring you to become a food detective or completely overhaul your diet. The glucose hacks that actually work and why they're weird. The most effective techniques sound absolutely ridiculous, but can reduce your glucose spikes by up to 75% without changing a single food you eat. These methods are so simple and weird that most people dismiss them immediately, but they're backed by serious scientific research and continuous glucose monitoring data that shows dramatic improvements in blood sugar control. The best part is you don't have to give up any foods you love. You just have to do some strange things that make you look like a health weirdo. I know these hacks sound bizarre, and honestly, some of them will make you look pretty odd to people around you. Drinking vinegar before meals makes you seem like one of those people who falls for every health trend on social media. But here's the thing, being a health weirdo with stable blood sugar is infinitely better than being normal with constant energy crashes and sugar cravings. The science behind these techniques is rock solid, and the results speak for themselves when you actually try them consistently. Let me start with the weirdest one that actually works incredibly well: drinking a tablespoon of vinegar diluted in water before you eat. This sounds like something your grandmother might have suggested for mysterious health reasons, but the research shows that vinegar can reduce the glucose spike from your meal by up to 30% and the insulin spike by up to 20%. The acetic acid in vinegar literally slows down the breakdown of starches into glucose in your digestive system, giving your body more time to process the sugar without creating massive spikes. The vinegar hack works because it interferes with enzymes in your small intestine that normally break down carbohydrates into glucose molecules. When these enzymes work more slowly, the glucose enters your bloodstream gradually instead of flooding in all at once. You can use any type of vinegar: apple cider vinegar, white vinegar, red wine vinegar. They all contain acetic acid that produces this effect. Just mix 1 tablespoon into a large glass of water and drink it up to 20 minutes before eating. The eating order hack is probably the most practical one that doesn't require you to look weird in public. You eat your food in a specific sequence: vegetables first, then protein and fats, then starches and sugars last. This isn't about combining foods or avoiding certain combinations. It's purely about the order in which you consume different types of food during the same meal. The fiber from vegetables creates a protective barrier in your intestines that slows glucose absorption from the carbohydrates you eat afterward. When you eat fiber-rich vegetables first, they form what researchers describe as a protective mesh in your small intestine. This mesh doesn't prevent glucose absorption, but it significantly slows the rate at which glucose molecules can pass through your intestinal wall into your bloodstream. Instead of getting a massive glucose spike from eating bread or pasta, you get a gentler, more gradual rise that your body can handle much more effectively. The fiber essentially acts like a speed bump for sugar absorption. Post-meal movement is another hack that seems too simple to work, but produces dramatic results in glucose monitoring studies. Walking for just 10 minutes after eating can reduce your glucose spike significantly because your muscles immediately start using the glucose in your bloodstream for energy. You don't need intense exercise. Even light walking, doing dishes, or tidying your house will activate muscle contractions that soak up excess glucose. Your muscles are like glucose vacuum cleaners that start working the moment they contract. When you move after eating, your muscle cells open up glucose transporters that pull sugar directly out of your bloodstream to fuel the movement. This happens independently of insulin, which means even people with insulin resistance can benefit from post-meal movement. The glucose that would normally spike your blood sugar gets absorbed by working muscles instead of accumulating in your bloodstream. The concept of putting clothes on your carbs sounds ridiculous, but it's actually a sophisticated approach to slowing glucose absorption. Whenever you eat something high in sugar or refined carbs, you add protein, fat, or fiber to the same meal. This combination slows digestion and reduces the speed at which glucose enters your bloodstream. Instead of eating a plain bagel that creates a massive spike, you eat a bagel with cream cheese and smoked salmon that produces a much gentler glucose curve. The clothing your carbs method works because protein and fat trigger the release of hormones that slow gastric emptying. When your stomach empties more slowly, the carbohydrates you've eaten get released into your small intestine gradually instead of all at once. This creates a sustained, controlled release of glucose rather than the flood that occurs when you eat refined carbs by themselves. These simple changes can actually break the sugar addiction cycle that keeps people trapped in constant cravings. When you prevent glucose spikes, you also prevent the crashes that trigger desperate hunger for more sugar. Your brain stops receiving the roller coaster of high and low glucose signals that create addictive eating patterns. Instead of experiencing the spike crash crave cycle multiple times per day, you maintain steadier blood sugar that allows your natural appetite regulation to function properly. Continuous glucose monitor studies from 2025 show that people who consistently use these techniques experience dramatic reductions in daily glucose spikes. These aren't small improvements. These are significant changes in metabolic health that happen within days of implementing the hacks. People report better energy, fewer cravings, improved sleep, and better mood regulation when their glucose levels become more stable throughout the day. The reason these simple solutions aren't widely known reveals something interesting about our healthcare and food systems. Food companies have little incentive to publicize these rapid benefits because these techniques don't require expensive medications, special products, or complex programs that generate revenue. They're basic biological principles that anyone can apply immediately without spending money or joining programs. These hacks work because they cooperate with your natural biology instead of fighting against it. Unlike restrictive dieting approaches that try to force your body to ignore its hunger signals, these techniques help your body process food the way it evolved to handle nutrients. They don't require willpower or deprivation. They just require understanding how your digestive system actually works and making small adjustments that support optimal function. What's really remarkable is how quickly your brain starts responding to these changes. Neuroplasticity allows reward pathways to reset over days when sugar is removed, and the initial cravings that feel overwhelming actually peak around 48 to 72 hours, then begin to subside. This timeline is faster than most people expect, which opens up possibilities that might surprise you. The 72-hour sugar detox that rewires your brain. Breaking free from sugar cravings can actually happen in just 72 hours. Most people think sugar addiction takes months or years to overcome, like some massive lifestyle overhaul that requires superhuman willpower and complete dietary perfection. But the reality is that your brain can reset its reward pathways, and your taste buds can recalibrate in less time than it takes for a weekend to pass. This isn't some miracle cure or marketing gimmick. It's basic neuroscience about how quickly your brain adapts when you remove the substance that's been hijacking your reward system. The first 3 days of eliminating sugar from your diet are gonna test every ounce of patience you have, but understanding what's happening in your body during this period makes the process much more manageable. Your brain has been conditioned to expect regular hits of dopamine from sugar consumption, and when you suddenly remove that source, your neurochemical systems go into panic mode. This isn't weakness or lack of discipline. It's your brain responding to what it perceives as a threat to its established reward patterns. Day 1 of sugar elimination usually starts out feeling manageable because your willpower is high and you're motivated by the decision to make a change. You might experience some mild headaches as your blood sugar stabilizes, but the real challenge begins when your brain starts sending out distress signals that sugar is no longer available. Your dopamine levels drop significantly, which affects your mood, energy, and motivation. You might feel irritable, anxious, or unusually tired as your brain chemistry begins adjusting to function without the artificial stimulation it's become accustomed to receiving. Day 2 is where things get really intense, and by intense I mean you're gonna feel like a zombie who's specifically angry at vegetables. This is typically when withdrawal symptoms peak and your brain is working overtime to convince you that eliminating sugar was a terrible idea. You might experience intense cravings that feel almost desperate, like your body is demanding immediate access to the substance it's been depending on for energy and pleasure. The fatigue can be overwhelming, brain fog makes it difficult to concentrate, and everything that normally brings you joy feels flat and uninteresting. The psychological challenges on day 2 are often more intense than the physical symptoms because your brain is essentially throwing a temper tantrum about not getting its expected dopamine hits. You might find yourself irritated by healthy foods that previously seemed appealing, and your brain will generate very convincing arguments about why you should abandon this whole sugar-free experiment. This is when most people give up, thinking that feeling this terrible means something is wrong, when actually it means the reset process is working exactly as it should. The science behind what's happening during these 72 hours shows just how quickly your brain can adapt when given the opportunity. Sugar consumption triggers dopamine release in the same pathways involved in addiction, and repeated exposure causes these pathways to require more stimulation to achieve the same pleasure response. When you remove sugar, your dopamine receptors begin to reset their sensitivity levels, which initially creates the uncomfortable withdrawal symptoms, but ultimately restores your brain's ability to feel pleasure from normal activities and foods. Research demonstrates that the brain's reward pathways start adapting within hours of removing an addictive substance, not weeks or months. Your dopamine receptors begin increasing their sensitivity when they're no longer being overstimulated by artificial sources. This process happens much faster than most people realize, which is why the 72-hour timeframe is so effective for breaking the initial addiction cycle. Day 3 is when most people experience what researchers call the breakthrough moment. Natural energy starts returning and the desperate cravings begin to subside. Your blood sugar has stabilized, your insulin sensitivity is improving, and your brain chemistry is beginning to function without artificial stimulation. The fatigue and brain fog start lifting, and you might notice that you can think more clearly and feel more emotionally balanced than you have in months or years. The changes in your taste buds during this 72-hour period are absolutely remarkable and often surprise people more than the energy improvements. Your taste receptors literally become more sensitive to natural sweetness when they're not being constantly overstimulated by processed sugars. Foods that tasted bland or boring before suddenly become flavorful and satisfying. An apple tastes incredibly sweet, vegetables have complex flavors you never noticed, and even plain water starts tasting better. This taste bud recalibration happens because sugar consumption actually dulls your ability to perceive subtle flavors and natural sweetness. When you remove the artificial intensity of processed sugars, your taste receptors reset their sensitivity levels and can once again detect the natural sweetness in whole foods. People often report that berries taste like candy, that roasted vegetables have incredible depth of flavor, and that foods they used to find boring are now genuinely enjoyable to eat. The long-term benefits that begin after this initial 72-hour reset period extend far beyond just reduced sugar cravings. Your sleep quality typically improves because your blood sugar isn't spiking and crashing throughout the night. Your energy levels become more stable throughout the day instead of following the roller coaster pattern of sugar highs and crashes. Your mood becomes more balanced because your brain chemistry isn't constantly being disrupted by artificial dopamine stimulation. After 72 hours, most people report that their previous sugar cravings feel completely foreign and unappealing, almost like remembering an addiction that belonged to someone else. The intense desire for cookies, candy, or processed foods is replaced by genuine satisfaction from natural foods and stable energy that doesn't require constant feeding. This dramatic shift in perception proves that the addiction was artificial and created by the products themselves, rather than being an inherent human weakness or permanent condition. What happens when millions of people start experiencing this kind of rapid transformation and begin to understand exactly how food companies have been manipulating their biology is going to change everything about how we approach food and health. The future of food, fighting back against the sugar matrix. The emerging trends in 2025 show that continuous glucose monitors are moving from medical devices for diabetics to mainstream consumer tools for anyone who wants to understand their metabolic health. These devices are becoming as common as fitness trackers, and they're revealing shocking truths about foods that people assumed were healthy. When someone straps on a glucose monitor and watches their blood sugar spike to diabetic levels after eating a bowl of oatmeal, that creates an immediate and undeniable connection between food choices and biological responses. According to the 2025 State of Wellness report by Lingo by Abbott, 82% of people who use continuous glucose monitors experience at least one surprising discovery about their food responses. Even more telling, 58% found that supposedly healthy foods caused larger glucose spikes than they expected. These aren't people eating obvious junk food. These are health-conscious individuals discovering that their morning smoothies and whole-grain cereals are creating metabolic chaos they never knew was happening. People are demanding transparency from food companies in ways that would have seemed impossible just 5 years ago. Consumers are no longer satisfied with vague marketing claims about health benefits. They want to see exactly how products affect their glucose levels, inflammation markers, and overall metabolic function. This demand for transparency is forcing companies to either reformulate their products or face losing customers who can now measure the biological impact of what they're eating. The food industry is facing increasing pressure to provide clear and accurate information about sugar content, with new labeling standards demanding greater transparency. Companies are being pushed to adopt stricter internal tracking and reporting practices, and digital tools including AI and data-driven platforms are being integrated to monitor compliance in real time. This reflects a broader shift towards consumer awareness and regulatory scrutiny that the industry can no longer ignore. Technology in 2025 is making it incredibly easy to track and understand individual responses to foods in ways that were impossible for previous generations. Continuous glucose monitors provide real-time feedback about how specific foods affect your blood sugar throughout the day. Apps can analyze this data alongside information about your sleep, stress levels, exercise, and other factors to create personalized recommendations about which foods support your health goals and which ones sabotage them. Advanced artificial intelligence can now analyze glucose monitor data alongside gut microbiome information, diet patterns, physical activity levels, and genetic factors to provide detailed assessments of metabolic health and diabetes risk. Stanford medicine researchers published a 2025 study in Nature Medicine showing that this multimodal approach can flag early signs of diabetes risk that standard HbA1c tests might miss, offering a more detailed assessment of metabolic health that could lead to personalized prevention strategies. The same Stanford research revealed that the time it takes for blood sugar to return to normal after a spike is a key indicator of diabetes risk. In people with type 2 diabetes, it often took 100 minutes or more for blood sugar to decrease after a spike, while healthier individuals return to baseline much faster. This insight helps people understand their individual risk levels and make targeted changes before developing serious health problems. A growing movement of people is using glucose data to make informed food choices rather than following generic dietary advice or marketing messages. These individuals are discovering that foods marketed as healthy often create worse glucose responses than foods that don't make any health claims. They're learning that their individual responses to foods can be dramatically different from what nutrition guidelines suggest, and they're making choices based on their personal biological data rather than external recommendations. This represents a fundamental shift away from processed foods toward real nutrition, as people realize that their energy levels, mood stability, and overall health depend on maintaining stable blood sugar throughout the day. When you can see in real time how different foods affect your glucose levels, the abstract concept of eating healthy becomes concrete data about which foods make you feel good and which ones make you feel terrible. The data shows that 50% of people using glucose monitors are cutting back on carbs, which aligns with the 19% of Americans planning to eat fewer carbs in 2025. More importantly, 76% of those using glucose tracking to manage hunger report that it's effective, and 3 in 4 agree that glucose tracking has helped them achieve their health goals. This isn't just awareness, it's driving tangible changes in eating habits and health outcomes. Understanding glucose response empowers people to make choices based on how they actually feel rather than how marketing messages tell them they should feel. When someone watches their glucose monitor show a massive spike after eating a product marketed as providing sustained energy, They learn to ignore the marketing claims and trust their biological data instead. This shift from external authority to internal feedback represents a fundamental change in how people relate to food and health information. The transformation happens quickly because glucose monitors provide the missing link between food choices and how people feel throughout the day. When you can correlate your afternoon energy crash with the glucose spike from your lunch, you gain practical knowledge that motivates immediate changes in eating behavior without requiring external discipline or complex meal planning. The simple hacks we've covered: eating vegetables first, drinking vinegar before meals, moving after eating, and clothing your carbs with protein and fat become incredibly powerful when you can see their effects in real time. Instead of following rules blindly, you watch your glucose levels respond differently when you apply these techniques. The 75% reduction in glucose spikes from proper food order isn't just a statistic. It becomes your personal experience that you can see happening on your phone. What's happening right now is that people are finally getting the tools they need to understand how their individual biology responds to different foods and eating patterns. The corporate manipulation that's been programming food cravings since childhood becomes obvious when you can measure its effects on your blood sugar. The engineered addiction cycles become impossible to ignore when you watch them play out in real time on a continuous glucose monitor. Once you understand how sugar hijacks your biology and you have the tools to see it happening, everything changes about your relationship with food. The cravings that felt impossible to resist suddenly make perfect biological sense, and the simple techniques that seem too easy to work become obviously effective when you can measure their impact. But understanding the manipulation is just the first step. Taking action means implementing the simple glucose hacks that can transform your relationship with food immediately. Breaking sugar addiction isn't about willpower or self-control. It's about understanding the biological and industrial forces that have been working against you since childhood. Food companies spent decades and billions of dollars engineering products to hijack your brain's reward system, and they started targeting you before you could even read ingredient labels. Your sugar cravings aren't personal failures. They're the exact responses these companies designed and tested to create in your brain. Once you understand the game, you literally can't be played by it anymore.